Our second story out front, the roid rage defense. Did Army Special Forces pump Sergeant Robert Bales with steroids before he killed 16 Afghan civilians in March 2012? According to his attorney, that's what he plans to argue at the penalty phase of his trial. Bales has agreed to plead guilty next week to avoid the death penalty, and in an effort to avoid a life sentence, his defense will also argue the Army knew he was suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and a traumatic brain injury when they sent him to Afghanistan. Out front tonight, Sergeant Bales' attorney, John Henry Brown. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Brown.
It's a pleasure, thanks.
Sir, do you have proof that Army Special Forces gave him steroids?
Yes, actually the Army's admitted that. I did want to correct one thing you said earlier, and that was it's not an injectable substance, it's a pill form, and it was provided to him by Special Forces personnel. Of course, nobody forces him to take it, but that's how he got it, and the Army admits that.
Okay, I appreciate the correction. Is it your contention that Sergeant Bales was forced to take these steroids in any way, if not physically forced, then emotionally forced, and forced to take the steroids?
Well, you know better than anybody, because I read your book, which is wonderful, by the way, and
Thank you.
You know how Special Forces have an influence on the regular infantry. And so I think it's a cultural problem. There's the Army's also admitted that there was a real failure of leadership at this camp, of the Special Forces leadership. So I think there was like almost peer pressure, I would call it, to do what the Special Forces people were doing.
So if I understand you correctly, and I just want to make sure I do, you plan to argue that the steroid use combined with the PTSD and the TBI, the traumatic brain injury, contributed to Sergeant Bales committing murder. So why not take that argument to trial?
Well, I mean, the risks are great. I mean, we had the best psychiatrists in the United States, literally, on PTSD and concussive head injuries working on this case, and we don't believe the defense would rise to the level of a legal insanity defense or a legal diminished capacity defense, but we think it's very mitigating. What you're going to hear and what the public's going to hear next Wednesday is what happened, and it's going to be very difficult for people to listen to. And that's going to take at least a whole day. And then in September, we're going to find out why it all happened. So the mental health issues, the PTSD, the concussive head injury, all of which the Army knew about, will be discussed mostly during the September trial we're going to have in front of a jury.
Well, if there were all these mitigating factors, and if there was some dereliction of duty on the part of the Army, having somebody in a war zone, on a multiple deployment, who had TBI, who had PTSD, why plead guilty at all?
Well, because you know, I'm a trial lawyer, and you know, the best trial and the best case in the world you can still lose, and I don't take lightly death penalty cases by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that when I got this case, that the Army was on a fast road to use this case as the first time to execute a soldier since 1961. And I think that we were on a fast track to do that. And after hundreds and hundreds of hours of work, we basically worked out this arrangement, which saving a life is more important, and he might have a chance for life with parole, which would be very important.
According to a Defense Department survey in 2008, just 2.5% of Army personnel had illegally used steroids within the past 12 months. That's not a high number. Have you learned anything in your research to suggest that that 2.5% is accurate or not accurate?
Well, I don't know how they'd even come up with a statistic like that. You'd have to take urine samples or blood samples, and I don't think voluntarily people who are taking steroids do that. I know that steroid use at this camp was endemic, and pretty much everybody was taking steroids. So I would just question that figure in general.
Do you know of other instances of this kind of thing happening? People jacked up on juice in a war zone, and maybe not something this horrific, but other incidents where there was unnecessary violence because of steroid use in Afghanistan or Iraq?
Yes, anecdotally, and a lot of anecdotes. that we've gotten. We have mental health experts and psychiatrists working with us that have been in the military and talk about this being a problem and a serious problem. And we all know the street term road rage is true. And I certainly have had other cases where the use of steroids have really alters a person's personality, perception, and aggressive tendencies.
But just to underline, no official reports, these are anecdotal stories.
That's correct. We may have more substantive evidence about that in September in the penalty phase.
All right, John Henry Brown, we hope you'll come back and talk to us more about this case.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.